Hey everyone, RogueGold here, and today we have what I think are some pretty interesting things to talk about. As you can see on screen right here, there was a Reddit post made earlier today, or tomorrow if you're watching this when it comes out, titled New Upcoming Exotic SMG in the Chinese Version of The Division 2. Now that title might send you into a flurry of questions, the foremost being, yes, there is indeed a Chinese version of The Division 2. We last talked about this I think well over a year ago, back in 2022, and so while some might be thinking, why is this relevant to us? We don't play the Chinese version of The Division 2 and we're not going to. That is true, but I think you'll see by the end of this video with some of the things I want to talk about, how it does grant us some interesting perspective as players of The Division to see the kind of direction that this new version is taking the game. So, this one might not be for all of you, but I think it's interesting, so let's dive in. And let's start with a brief recap of what exactly is going on with this Chinese version of The Division 2. As I said, it's been a long time since we talked about this. Basically, it was decided that a collaboration would occur between Ubisoft Shanghai and Tencent to release a ported version of The Division 2 in China. And that's because previously The Division 2 was not available in China due to censorship. The Chinese government and marketplace was not satisfied with The Division 2's kind of political stances and other things that they portray in the game, and so the overall goal of this port was to remove and change those different things to make it acceptable to be released to that platform. And to my knowledge, this was all being worked on by a different team at Shanghai that was not related to the portion of Shanghai that helped on our version of The Division 2, like with the Year 5 Season 2 Paradise Lost Incursion. So it gets kind of messy. Anyway, that was all a long time ago, and I had kind of mostly forgotten about it. But with this news of the SMG that we'll get to shortly, I also looked this up, and it turns out that the Chinese version of The Division 2 actually launched a bit under a month ago. As you can see right here, it says the Division 2 Chinese version will officially launch on November 29th, and there was even this artwork here that says 11/29. So, as of right now, the Chinese version of the Division 2 is live. And that has led to people beginning to find out a few details about it, including this SMG that apparently is going to be in the game that obviously we do not have in our version of the Division 2. And I find that interesting for two reasons. One, obviously the gameplay side of things, what does this SMG do that we don't have in our version of the Division 2? But as I said, also these details that we'll get to shortly also lay out some interesting bits about the game overall that I think shine an interesting light on our position as players of the Division. But first, let's check out details on this new SMG itself. You can see this was posted at the same time as the Reddit post went up. New upcoming exotic SMG in the Chinese version of the Division 2. Now, at first glance, when I saw this thing, I thought it was like a fake or something that someone put together. I think it's just because of the lighting and the overall quality of the image. At first glance, I was like, this is just a mash of like a bunch of different skins, but it does actually have kind of a thematic to it. You can see this yellow and black honeycomb design along here. There's a wasp right here, which does play into the talent that we'll get to. There's a little canister here. You can see these kind of glowing blue coils around the barrel. So it looks kind of neat. They do also lay out what it actually does. The name of it is Endless Pursuit. It's of course an SMG. The inscription says the more power you have, the more enemies you need to defeat. That's responsibility, and that's from the Fanatical Exile. Let's come back to this part shortly because this starts to get into the thing that I wanted to talk about as well as this, but if we move further down here, you can see that's the talent. Obviously it's all in Chinese, which I do not speak, but fortunately they provide a translation. The talent is Wasp Strike. Killing an enemy within 15 meters grants the following bonuses for 20 seconds. Firstly, you get 10% weapon damage up to 30 stacks, that's crazy, and you also get 10% crit damage up to 30 stacks. It says then when the bonuses are active, you have a 30% chance to apply a 5-second poison effect to your next target on hit. Killing the target refreshes the bonus duration, and for every enemy killed, the bonus duration will be decreased by 0.5 seconds. So like I said, looking at this purely from a gameplay perspective, this talent and the overall construction of this exotic is totally super interesting to look at, I think so, simply because it's not something that we have in our version of the Division 2. But what I found to be even more interesting for this overall conversation is some of the things that they list right here. It says single shot damage is 3,423, inaccurate because Chinese version of the Division 2 has changed the global value of enemies' HP and weapon damage to cater to weapon upgrade system. Weapon upgrade system. It says then down here, attributes are headshot damage, damage to targets out of cover, damage to elites, and rate of fire, and they're all locked by default because every weapon consumes materials to unlock each attribute and upgrade from 0, and thus every weapon has more than one special attribute. So this is is pretty interesting. Most notably because I think it hints at an overall direction that this port and game of the, Chinese version of The Division 2 is likely taking, and that's one that's not all that dissimilar from The Division Resurgence, the upcoming mobile title that we have coming to, the rest of the world early next year. In that, the game is going to have a lot more monetization baked into its core, more so than we've ever seen in The Division 1 or 2. And I think this is further backed up by this new job listing that I actually saw a few days ago, so that's the first time this all popped onto my mind, in that they are hiring for a senior producer on the, it says right here, Chinese edition of The Division 2. And under one of the job descriptions it says, leading the creation of new content for The Division at Ubisoft's AAA standards in the Chinese market landscape based on the needs and habits of Chinese players, and building an evergreen local game with an ideal monetization strategy. So in fairness, it does not explicitly state that this upgrade system that they're talking about here is all monetary based, but to me, the writing is on the wall. They want this version of The Division in China to just be a money printer. In the sense that, the same way that Resurgence is doing it, if players are willing to pay to upgrade their guns even more so, power than it can just grant them in the game, a lot of them are going to do it. So what I think you're really seeing here with this overall version of The Division 2 in China is a game that looks like The Division 2 at its core, but very likely they've layered on top a lot of extra elements and monetizable elements that is going to pretty drastically shift the game from the one that we would all recognize and love. And more than anything, I just kind of wanted to drive home the point that I think as Division players, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of how lucky we are in this space of the looter shooter genre. There are many games out there, including very similar games to The Division like Destiny, that monetizes so much more of the game. In there, you pay for expansions once a year. You have to pay for every season if you want the content for it, otherwise you miss out. To my understanding, you can buy boosts for these different in-game events that go on. And of course, then you have cosmetics and other things that get pumped into their cash shop much more often. Compared to The Division 2, we haven't had to pay for actual new content, and I don't think people realize this. You haven't had to pay a single cent to continue playing The Division 2 if you already own stuff in nearly 4 years since the release of Warlords of New York. Now, that's not to say there isn't any monetization in The Division 2. Obviously, you can buy the premium versions of each season's pass to get extra rewards, and you can buy any cosmetics that they put through the store. But as far as being required to spend money to progress your content, character, whatever in the game, you haven't had to do it in a very long time. Now, partly, sure, that is due to the fact that we haven't gotten as much content as games like Destiny or other things, but I just think that's one point that a lot of players currently don't really appreciate as much, is that the grass isn't always greener, and as a looter shooter live service title, it's kind of miraculous that The Division 2 has been able to stay around for as long as it has with all of the turmoil that it's had without having to be that much of a monetized experience. Because it costs a lot of money to keep these things running, and so far, the devs at Massive have been able to steer away from that and keep the game in the spirit that they envisioned it. So that's kind of a whole longer tangent, but that is basically what I wanted to cover in this video, was just take a look at this interesting little bit from the Chinese port of The Division 2, follow up with the fact that it has launched, because that's something that I really was not on my radar, and just in general have a bit of a discussion about monetization with The Division, because it's something that you're seeing them pivot a lot more towards in things like Resurgence, and now with this Chinese version of The Division 2. And I think if you really take a step back and look at what The Division 2, our version of it, does in terms of monetization, we're quite fortunate, and I hope that future iterations that stay with Massive like the Division 3 and, future Division 2 content, I hope they continue respecting their players' time and wallets by not making us overcharge for things that really don't need to be monetized, because at least for me, that is something that I really appreciate at this point in time. So that wraps up everything I've got to say, people. I know that was a bit long-winded. We kind of covered a bunch of different topics there, but I thought it was an interesting discussion. So if you enjoyed it, certainly let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of all the things we covered? The Chinese version of The Division 2 in general, this unique exotic that they're getting in that game, and monetization in general. What do you think about its current implementation in The Division compared to some of its competitors? And where do you see it heading in the future? That's going to do it for me today, though, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. RogueGold. Out.